Next, we'll be going over control statements, flow, and scope. So, a block of code can be created using the do and end statements. So, what this does is it creates a new block of code inside the current block of code that we currently have. So, what is a block of code? Well, put simply, it's a local space for you to do work in that you can then return to later to clean up. Effectively like starting a new workspace for, one part of your project and then closing that up so that it won't clog the rest of your project when you're done. And you can do that with do, end. I did not cover the local statement earlier specifically because I wanted to wait until I got to this, but you may have seen, or you may see something like somebody saying local variable equals blah. You'll notice I didn't do that earlier. But what this does basically is define the variable only to the current block, as well as any blocks that are created inside of it. Which, for this script, when it's defined here, that is the entire block of code. So it'll be defined in this block and this block, and that's all there is to define it in, since it's at the top of the script. Usually, unless you have a specific reason to need a global variable, it's good practice to call local when you define a value for the first time, just so that you can look at it and know, okay, this is where I initially defined it. But what does all this really mean? As an example, let's say I have some variable called a equals 5, and I say do print a, end. So if we run this code, it prints out 5. If I define another value to be let's say 10, and we print that as well, it works just like you'd expect. But if we tried to print the values outside of that scope, you'll see it says nil. Okay, that's not what we were expecting. We obviously set it to equal 10 here, so what's going on? Well, it's defined only for this block and any blocks inside of it. We haven't defined it for this block. So Lua is going to tell us that it's nil, just not a useful value, because as far as this block is concerned, B does not exist. It hasn't been set yet. It does exist to this scope though, because it's defined only in this scope. Lua provides statements that allow us to control the flow of a program. If statements are one of those, as well as the different loops that I have covered in another video. But how if statements work is they will only run the block of code if the statement that they evaluate returns to be true or truthy. As an example, we can say local property equals true. So if condition, then run this block of code. And how this works is we say, this is just a condition checker here basically, so if this returns what we need it to, then we'll run the block from here to here, and then we'll resume. But if it doesn't occur, or if the condition is false, then we'll just skip over this section entirely and start out here. Now, to show this off, let's say, for example, I have some of my operators here that I can use to check different values. So I can say if property is true, then we'll print correct, just so we can see what's going on. And of course it does print correct because everything here is right. But if property isn't true, you'll notice we get no output. We have some other statements that go along with the if statement that allow us to do little neater things with our code. So say if property is not true, we want it to do something else, we would use the else statement, which you have to use for the end statement. So what's happening here is You create the block of code if this property passes. If it doesn't pass, then we go to this block of code. So we'll say incorrect here, and that's what it puts in the console, or the output. But let's say we were working with a number and we wanted to have 2 or 3 different things happen. What we could do is use the else if statement. And the way this works is this block of code will run only if the first check fails and this check passes. Whereas the else statement will just run after all the other checks have failed. The else statement won't run unless it doesn't do this block or this block first. And as you can see, we get it to print out correct, but if we set the property to equal true, it no longer prints out correct, it instead prints out okay then. This is a quick tip I wanted to throw in. Since if statements only evaluate based on truthiness or falsiness, which I'm not sure if I have covered yet in the video series, but I will if I need to, you can omit the check to see if property equals true. You can just say if property then print cool and good. And what this will do is this is a little bit different than checking if it's explicitly true, because what will happen is Lua will check if the property is anything other than false or nil, and if it is, then it will allow the block of code to run. It'll pass the condition check. I want to touch back on the logical operators that I mentioned earlier as well while I'm at it. I have an example set up just to demonstrate something. So we define a local variable. We'll just say Peter. Well, imagine we're trying to find out if Peter Griffin is checked into the hotel or not. So here's our value, but say somewhere else in our code we need to check if not Peter, then print no Peter. And so this is going to check if it's going to look at the Peter variable, and it's going to say if Peter not, and that's going to negate whatever value is in Peter, and then it's going to run that to the condition checker. So what's happening first is when we say print not Peter, you see it prints out true. And what that does is it's saying, you know, not, like I already explained, is the negation. So if you have a truthy value, it will return false, and if you have a falsy value, it will return true. And since Peter is nil, that is a falsy value, so when you type not Peter, that's going to return true, and that'll let the condition checker pass, so it will tell you that you have no Peter. As a shorthand, you can use the not operator as well as your original condition inside quotation marks, or no, those aren't quotation marks, those are parentheses, my bad, inside parentheses, as a way of checking as long as the condition is not true, then you want to run some code based on that.